Welcome, everyone. Welcome to this webinar on Trust No One, the role of malware detection in government strategies. Our purpose here today is to help you better understand the real-world application of zero trust and how malware analysis could or should play a role in such frameworks. My name is Alex Gunnevig, and I will be your host for the next 30 minutes. Allow me a couple of housekeeping points before we start. So this is the third webinar in a series of expert discussions that we're running together with Forrester and Forrester analysts. In the previous sessions, we actually covered phishing and SOC automation, in case you're interested. If you want to have a listen, then please have a look on our VMware website. Like the ones before, of course, the session is being recorded. And extracts and transcripts will be available from the website probably at the beginning of next week. So check it out in case you're interested. Do please feel free to participate in our discussion by posting your questions into the chat. That should be available to every one of you. Thank you. So thanks for your patience. Now it's my great pleasure to introduce our two guests. Both of you are experts and deeply familiar with the strategy implementation and the technology around zero trust and malware analysis. We have here bold at work, Carlos Rivera from Forrester. Welcome, Carlos. Carlos is a senior analyst at Forrester, advising security and risk professionals, focusing on zero trust in practice. I think this means that you advise government and enterprise security leaders on developing implementation plans, selecting cybersecurity controls, and designing the architectures around zero trust. And hello, Carlos.
Hello, thank you for having me. I think you summed it up really well.
Thank you. Great pleasure to have you. And we have here in black, basically, Dr. Carsten Willems, an award-winning cybersecurity expert focusing on the domain of malware and sandboxing. Carsten, I think you hold a PhD on this very topic. And you're also the CEO of VMware, a Germany-based cybersecurity company that offers industry-leading technologies for malware and phishing analysis and thus advanced threat detection. Welcome to you as well.
Hi, Alex. Hi, Carlos. I'm looking very much forward to that.
Thank you. Okay, let's jump in at the deep end. First question goes to Carlos. From your perspective, from talking to all of these leaders from the government and the private sector, the security leaders, what are the current challenges that you see? What are government agencies struggling with at the moment, especially around zero trust?
That's a great question. I think that we've come a long way from where we started off with the adoption of zero trust. And I think you'll see a bit of a difference between a public sector government entity and private sector, more of a private companies and corporate organizations. The challenges that were kind of faced with zero trust was around the understanding, a lack of understanding, and that's still very much the case when you talk to corporate and private sector. But with the public sector, it's a little bit different. I think initially it started off as a lack of alignment or a lack of knowledge around zero trust, but it's changed now. Obviously, with these mandates that are being pushed out, guidances and standards, there's obviously a firmer understanding of what zero trust means for the government and public sector type of entities. But there's a challenge in terms of outdated technologies, the legacy architecture that they have to deal with, and aligning that technology with what zero trust is setting out to accomplish. And so that's the challenge that they're truly facing. And it's still a little bit of lack of alignment, which is still true because you still have that kind of mindset, especially in the public sector, that there's individuals that are set in their way of doing things. And, the whole mantra of, I don't want to reinvent the wheel or don't fix what isn't broken kind of situation, that causes a lot of disruptions in progress towards advancing your zero trust strategy, whether that means adopting a new technology or implementing a new process for improving your overall preventative measures. In private sector, I like to think there's a little bit more advancement, especially in the financial industry. They've been very much ahead of the curve when it comes to adopting zero trust. I always say even zero trust, right? We'll just say technology in general and modern standards and best practices and technologies. Financial and just institution has been far advanced. They've been in the cloud migration way ahead of most of other verticals. They've been adopting other, software as a service type of capabilities. So they've been well positioned to begin that maturity of zero trust. So I like to think that's the difference. It's really still kind of a little bit of a lack of an alignment from a functional perspective, but with public sector is outdated technologies and legacy architectures.
Before I turn the question to Karsten, and I could see that you were twitching actually to comment on this, I would actually like to follow up with one more question, Carlos.
Sure.
And that is my personal perception, and I'm not the expert here, but and you correct and comment, please. My perception is that zero trust was at the beginning a lot about the parameter identity and access management in practice, and is only now starting to shift towards detection response capabilities and actually looking at what is the analyst doing in this, how practical and implementable is this actually? Am I off? Am I facetious, or what's your view on that?
No, I think that's kind of another debate that we have even amongst myself and my colleagues in Forrester, where it's kind of where we get to the discussion of where do we draw that line, or where does that intersect begin, or where does zero trust architecture end, and where does incident response and SOC operations begin kind of situation. Because a lot of some of the other misconception was, does zero trust replace incident response, or does it take the position of the SOC? And no, the answer is no, it does not. Because first and foremost, zero trust as an architectural and information security model is a preventative approach. It's a way of improving your preventative measures and controls and reassessing how you deploy those controls in the most effective and efficient manner. I like to think that the intersection or the touch point for where zero trust and incident response kind of interact is going to be visibility analytics. And that's where you start getting that information and telemetry, because that's one, it's going to inform the automation orchestration that is part of zero trust, but it's part of kind of improving the policies. How do you streamline those processes and onboarding processes, offboarding process for user devices, things of that nature, improving your policies throughout different various enforcement points. But it also, that telemetry and visibility needs to be collected and inform the SOC and inform the incident response, so that they have more insight as to what is going on, who's doing what, when, where, and why, to make more real-time responses to those incidents and be able to focus on the things that matter the most.
Thank you. And before I pick up on so many things that you just touched upon, I think I want to give Karsten a chance also maybe, and turn the initial question to you, Karsten, about the challenges that you currently see from, I think we have a number of government customers, right? So what is your perspective actually on what the challenges are there?
Yeah, so in my view, governments face, on the one hand, they face similar challenges as the private sector, but on a much larger scale and complexity and impact. And then there are some unique ones, additional ones. So let's first look at these different challenges. So obviously, the attack surface that governments need to protect is much larger and much more heterogeneous than those of corporations, because they need to protect their own systems, their own people, their own staff, their own infrastructure. But then they also need to protect the interests of their nation, like the citizens, the corporations. Critical infrastructure is a very important aspect here. And they have a lot of these public-facing systems, election systems. So it's very hard for attackers to get their hands on these systems. Then on the adversary side, it's not only the criminals that have these financial objectives, but they are facing nation-state actors with espionage and sabotage and all these misinformation targets. These actors obviously have much more resources, much more time, much more expertise, and they're conducting more sophisticated attacks like target attacks and these supply chain attacks. And then the impact, of course, impact on economy, impact on the people, impact on democracy is much more critical than the impact that you would see in a private sector organization. And then there are also some non-attack related challenges of governments where typically the private sector is in a better position, like fragmentation amongst the different agencies with knowledge sharing, information sharing problems and unclear responsibilities. I mean, we have that in organizations as well, yeah? But I think it is a much larger scale. Then obviously governments are much more constrained by regulatory and compliance requirements. And then the things that Carlos mentioned, like legacy systems, less budget flexibility and stuff like that. On the opposite side, when we look at the solutions and at the activities that our governments implementing for security, I think they're more or less working on the same things like technology, processes, human-centric awareness, training, all these kind of things. But they have some special powers, because governments can create regulations. Yeah? And by that, indirectly enhance security on a much slower but broader scale, right? And what also I see governments, I mean, we have a lot of these information sharing activities by governments with the national certs and the ISAC groups. And what I recently saw, and I think that is a new trend, that governments also provide security services, like the CISA, for example, providing that malware next generation sandbox. I also saw that from the Canadian government. We know in Middle East, the governments are providing services for free to their citizens and to their economy. So that is something unique and different to corporations, right?
Something very recent that we've started to see, I think, within the last 12 months or so. Mm-hmm. So then I would, going back to maybe your experience in terms of the best practices, Carlos, what in your view, what are the key pillars for rolling out or applying Zero Trust successfully?
I like to think that it's always going to be people, processes, and technology. Those are the three things you need to improve within an organization and keep in alignment and have a kind of a holistic viewpoint when it comes to beginning your Zero Trust journey. Because people is more of, it ultimately comes down to a cultural and change management that the organization needs to kind of get over. And it's still process. It's still processes going on, even still on the government side. It kind of, to your point, Carson, there's some functions still have a disconnect, and there's a reason why we emphasize the need for collaboration for Zero Trust to be successful. A case in point kind of situation. I was recently working with a client in the government sector, and I had them perform kind of an assessment of their Zero Trust maturity, right? And the difference between how the C-level leadership and top-tier leadership viewed their maturity of the architecture versus the more technical management level was very different. You know, C-level saw it, and they believe the architecture was still beginner. But the more technical, well-versed backgrounds and architects, they viewed it as intermediate, which told me you guys are not talking. There's a lack of understanding of what are the capabilities that exist already in an architecture that perhaps you're just not leveraging in the most effective and efficient manner. Yes, there's emerging technologies out there, but that doesn't necessarily mean you have to go out and procure that technology to begin your Zero Trust journey. You start leveraging the tools and solutions you have in place, and reassessing how you are deploying that. So hopefully I'm answering your question, actually.
Maybe. I think so. I would like.
Yeah, so sure. In terms of best practices, yeah, it begins with like the change in cultural. Obviously, when it comes to technology, you assess the technology that makes more sense to your requirements. It's some organizations, especially in the government, there's a need or hunger for wanting to adopt the latest technologies, but have control over it. And so does it make sense to adopt technology that's cloud native only or as a SaaS service? Not necessarily the point, right? And so there's some organizations that'll benefit, they'll be happier with a cloud native type of solution. And it makes more sense because they're in that cloud migration effort. And that's part of their long-term goal is to migrate to the cloud and invest in that technology. But on the flip side is that if you're maintaining some form of on-prem type of capability, you have on-prem use cases that need to be addressed, then you need to make sure that you're investing in the right solutions that can translate for both a remote and on-prem use case. Because what I found often was organizations who, let's say, invested in a ZTNA capability, and that was the hot technology in between 2021 and 2022, where everyone was remote and we needed to address that immediate need and protect that use case. But now that we've returned to this new norm, we're a hybrid workforce, everyone was returning to office, they found that technology they initially invested in is having issues with translating and replicating that capability for local use and local use cases. So that's usually where I try to make clients understand that there's a need to make sure that they take a step back, view the big picture, and assess what's the long-term goal and are you making the right investment?
I'd like to flip the question to Karsten in terms of, can you tell me a little bit from your experience, what is it that customers, especially maybe also at different levels in the organization, maybe from an analyst perspective specifically, what benefits do people get out of working with, a platform that VMware provides, very practically speaking?
Yeah, so let me just say a few words on our platform or on solutions like VMware, so we can talk about what the actually benefit of that is. So what we do is called behavior-based detection or advanced threat detection or automated malware analysis or sandboxing. So many different names depending on the particular use case and when the technology was invented. The point is, what we're doing is we're performing a deep analysis on suspicious content in order to identify zero-day threats and in order to generate threat intelligence. And there is no magic about it. I mean, if you can spend 2 minutes, 3 minutes, 4 minutes instead of just 1 second or 100 milliseconds as an email security gateway or an endpoint AV typically can do, obviously you can go deeper and you can detect things that otherwise would not be detected. So the different use cases for these kind of automated deep analysis, like improving your detection capabilities as a second line of defense, obviously improving your incident response, because if you can get threat insights within 2 minutes instead of after a few hours or a few days, and if you can scale that up, I mean, that dramatically increases the time or that dramatically increases the speed at which you can handle an incident response, right? And then there's this new, I mean, it's not new, but it's kind of a new trend that threat intelligence is being used on a large scale, where you can learn from other victims, successful or non-successful, doesn't matter. But just that there was a cyber attack on one of your peers next to you, and you can prepare yourself against a likely or the same attack in the future. So this is what I meant earlier with this knowledge sharing, information sharing. We need to combine that what we see in the field with what others see in the field. We need to exchange very quickly information on ongoing cyber attacks, and only then we become really successful. And that one aspect on what the analyst role, I really like that Forrester term, Analyst Experience, because it's perfectly suited to explain one of our main strengths. And we call that clarity, but I believe it is more or less the same concept. It's not about having a super fancy UI or dashboards that look like a computer game or like from the future, but it's all about how we collect data, how we structure data, how we present data, and how we make that data accessible to the analyst and walk him or her through the process and guide the attention. Instead of throwing all the data at once in one long sequence. No. Data needs to be structured, and there are certain order of questions that you have to ask, like, is it bad? Is it known? What are the high-level techniques being applied? And then you can go deeper and deeper and deeper and deeper. And I believe that is something that really makes VMware unique, the way how we provide data and we separate relevant data from irrelevant, high level from low level, and really provide not only the relevant data, but also make it very easy to guide the attention and make it accessible. So it only takes a few minutes instead of hours to read the report. And that is specifically important in the current times of skill shortage, because skill shortage typically is not or often is the skill level that is the problem here, not the amount of people, right? And if you have a junior, it takes forever to separate signal from noise. It's easier for an expert, but it's really hard for a junior. So I believe Analyst Experience, that is something that really makes a difference between just 100 pages of PDF or an interactive report where all the data is enriched and annotated and systematically presented.
Carlos, do I need to give you the mic on Analyst Experience? I think
I think that there's
Forrester invented it.
Yes, I'm happy that Carson brought it up, because yes, it is Analyst Experience is something that has been coined here at Forrester, and it's been a topic of interest for us in our evaluative research as well, because there's a reason why we're starting to include Analyst Experience as a criteria in many of our evaluative research for various different technologies, whether that's enterprise firewalls, whether that's email security, whatever the case may be, because what we're looking for is how can we gain that information, the insights that these other platforms are providing to make actionable decisions for the analysts. You know, it's one thing to gain that visibility, it's another to do something with that information. And this is where that, like I mentioned, the handoff between here's zero trust architecture as a preventative measure and where does incident response, take hold. It's that visibility and analytics of that information to make actionable decisions.
Speaking, okay, I'm going to save my question. It's going to be about
platforms. Let me just throw one thing in, because I for 10 years now, since the inception of VMware, we talked about full visibility, and I really like that term. But just over the recent year or so, I learned visibility is one thing. It means the data point is there. Perception is another thing. that means I see the data point, yeah, amongst all the other data points. And comprehension is what we really want to achieve, that I understand and can act and respond and use that data point. I mean, visibility, yeah, perception, better, comprehension, that's the best, right?
Exactly.
Another model. But I'd like to pick up on the comment around about the platform, I think, Carlo, that you made in en passant, so to speak. And especially, I don't know, maybe first to you, Carlos, then to Karsten. So there's a lot of large platform vendors out there, right? And of course, government entities tend to turn to them because, yeah, homogeneity of the platform, you know, easier to roll out, maybe, et cetera. Your view on that? Good idea, bad idea?
Again, for me, it depends on who you're talking to and what are the requirements of the organization. Because what I like to say is that you need to have a balance of both worlds. You need to have a balance of, here's a platform, and this is within our security stack. This is where it makes sense to have a platform offering. But if it makes more sense in terms of comfort and skill and comprehensiveness for your workforce, does it make sense to have a best of breed in this area? Especially if it's to fill a gap, right? All these platforms have multiple offerings, but they're always going to have a gap in coverage. How are you going to fill that gap? And this is where these best of breed kind of solutions can come into play. You may have a platform that may be offering a form of AMA or sandboxing capability, but if it's not to the degree or up to the par that you prefer, and maybe you want something that's best of breed, that's what you're going to start looking at. You start looking at that balance and integration, interoperability of a best of breed solution with a platform offering.
Yeah,
Karsten,
I mean,
any thoughts?
my view is clear. What we typically see and what we recommend is combining platforms with best of breed point products for mission critical use cases. I mean, I hate complexity. I love simplicity. So I totally get the point why platform make a lot of sense for different reasons. However, I mean, a platform vendor never be laser focused on one thing because they do 20 things, right? And also security is a team play. That's for sure. Each vendor, no matter how large, how experienced, how old, whatever it is, each vendor has its strengths and its weaknesses and its focus areas and its blind spots. And the only way how we can increase and get to the best security posture ever is by combining different technologies, different approaches, I mean, we don't want to have a single point of failure, right? That's another reason why for mission critical use cases, these should be combined.
So, yeah, I would say like for those small to mid-sized market too, it makes more sense to go for a platform, right? Because it's kind of like that's your foot in the door, especially if you're short on resources and budget, and it seems like the most cost-effective way to go. But as your organization grows and expands, you're going to start needing to invest in more comprehensive, more accurate types of capabilities to fill those gaps, right? And this is like Karsten was saying, you as things get more complex, you need to have the tools that can address that complexity and bring it and make sense and bring it all together.
In reality, I don't know. I mean, I know some platforms where you get everything through one single pane of glass. At least that is what they tell you. But in the end, you feel on a daily basis how different solutions try to be integrated with each other and are actually not integrated. Alex, you know what I'm talking about, which particular tools? Yeah.
I'll pass on this one, but maybe let's walk away from the platform discussion versus best of breed. You know, summarizing that there is a need for both, right? Probably in terms of, you know, supporting the how did you say, filling some of the capability, I don't want to say holes, but some of the weaknesses in order to get the best mix. Then also maybe a question around how to find the balance between proactive and being reactive. So incident response by definition is reactive, right? So meaning, and zero trust, I understand now also, or not only now, has always propagated the idea that assume breach, right? You're going to have to assume breach, no matter which platform you actually have, and no matter how much money you invested into it. So what's the role of incident response, or where does it sit? Where does also maybe where do the sandboxing or the advanced malware then need to sit in the architecture? Is it at the good old, the venerable old firewall, or is it maybe at the back in the SOC? Any thoughts on that? Maybe from either of you? Or
Well,
where
for
could
me,
it fit?
I believe it's still a SOC capability. AMA is still going to be a SOC capability because you have those preventative measures, and firewalls are a preventative type of tool from the get-go. They have that capability to, and they might have IDS and IPS and you know, but that's informed through other analytics such as AMA, right? Those are going to be informed by that machine learning and information and telemetry that they collect to make more decisions. But I believe that AMA can exist in both in that kind of sense. It could most primarily in the SOC, but like I mentioned before, Zero Trust is primarily going to be a very preventative type of approach to your architecture. And AMA is in taking advantage of that visibility. There's going to be gains through all those various different controls and enforcement points to start, you know, making sense and turning that information into human readable information, making it more comprehensive, to Carson's point. But ultimately it's to enhance the incident response. It's to improve the overall experience for the analyst. When you have this information, you're getting all this noise, where does it make sense to make it more automated in terms on the firewall to respond to and respond and address a basic and more known kind of threat that is detected, versus an analyst can actually focus on a zero-day type of incident, and then you can invest that time and effort in doing that investigation with that.
Yeah. So sandboxing was invented in the 2000s, mid of 2000s. I know that pretty well. And the main idea was to
Because you invented it.
for
You
incident
invented
response. Sorry, right? Yeah. So incident response was the main use case. And then FireEye came and used it for detection purposes everywhere, yeah, in their products. And then it's being used for generating threat intelligence. But with at least with our solutions, we see more and more use cases in the SOC, mainly, you're right, but also with other security functions, where in the past, only analysts could have done that work manually. And either you put those analysts there, which was super expensive, or you said, it's too expensive, I don't do this job. And now with sandboxing capabilities that produce much less noise, that are much more trustworthy, that are much faster, we see that our solutions, at least, are being used for use cases that were not on our radar years ago, like for threat hunting, detection engineering, user-reported phishing, right? But you started the question with being proactive. I mean, that is the imminent problem and challenge of security, that it's normally reactive, yeah, because the attacker, it's easy for the attacker just to find one way. The defender needs to protect all possible ways and is always typically one step behind. However, there are some trends here. So first of all, just using a solution like VMware, advanced threat detection, already shifts a bit from reactive in the direction of proactive, because now you detect something that has never seen before on day zero. And not only after a week, after a month, after a year, right? But
when
what
the
I believe,
signature is out.
yeah, and what I already mentioned before, I think that is even more important, is the usage of threat intelligence. That it's not new. I mean, Shadow Server, they've been doing that for 15 years, 20 years, collecting and generating TI on large scale. But now it starts that organizations really use the IOCs for detection, engineering, for threat hunting, for blocking, and they're using threat intelligence also on a more strategic level to assess their defense capabilities against the techniques that are being used in the wild right now. Yeah, so I believe leveraging threat intelligence really puts you into a position where you can predict and preempt if that works right? And last but not least, I mean, we talked about automation, we talked about skill shortage, and in the end, the number of attacks is increasing. The number of victims or targets is increasing. The number of attackers is increasing, but the number of defenders is not increasing at the same speed, right? So in order to get rid of that backlog, and in order to get rid of this endless incoming stream of alerts, we need other ways. We need automation. We need powerful tools. We need to make better use of our very scarce security people and staff, right? To put them into the position to become proactive. Otherwise, they will always be reactive. I mean, how can that be? So I believe it's a combination of different things that is needed here. And sandboxing or advanced threat detection or AMA can play a role in different pieces. It's not the silver bullet, like nothing else out there, but it's a very critical capability that is needed in so many different places to automate and accelerate experts and enable juniors. And that is what we need. Yeah.
Last question, thank you. Last question from the audience, actually. If you were going to place your dollars in cybersecurity in the next 5 years, what would be your top recommendation, Carlos?
Into security as into the security operations center? Is that the question? The visibility analytics, first and foremost, because you want to make sure you have to be able to collect that information and do something with it. And I think that's kind of the disconnect right now with some of the legacy architecture and some of the organization, is that how do we gain the insight? One, we're gaining that insight with the enforcement points, but it's doing something actionable with it. That's kind of the missing point, I would say. And I'm sure that Ali and Jeff might have a different view on this. They're one of the more subject matter experts on that aspect. But I think that in terms of the visibility analytics, that's something that some of the organizations still struggle with, because visibility analytics doesn't necessarily mean, oh, I need the visibility so I can get an inventory of what's going on in my architecture. It's also the visibility of, I need to know who's talking what, when, where, and get that information. And is this behavior acceptable in my organization? And how do I respond to that behavior? And I especially with the looming threat with the newer technologies such as AI and quantum computing, how do we get ahead of that? And I think that AMA can be a good tool to be positioned in helping organizations achieve what I've been asked by clients is, what are vendors and what are technologies doing to make us defensible against AI and quantum computing? And I think that's the first step.
I do have one more question, a couple of questions coming in from the audience. I think we're almost out of time, but allow me, maybe you've already answered it, but I just want to call it out. Trying to implement zero trust, how can different teams be on the same page about how to adopt it and what to adopt?
I mean, I'm assuming that's to me.
I'm assuming, I guess so, yes.
What are the best practices of getting them aligned?
Yes.
I think a good exercise in doing the assessment, a good example is what the scenario or case study I kind of mentioned earlier, where the organization is not just one person doing the assessment and then say, hey, go forth and conquer. I think there's some value in having your team, identifying those key roles that are going to have an impact and influence, especially if they manage a particular domain of your architecture, whether it's application security, network architecture, whatever the case may be. Have those specific leaders take the assessment, collectively talk to each other and view what that assessment was, because that's going to fuel the conversation, especially if there's a disconnect between the leadership and the rest of the team. That needs to be an understanding that they have to get past that first to be aligned on what does the mission need, where are our weaknesses, and how do we prioritize what tools we need to invest in to begin that journey.
And you've just started to answer the third audience questions that I've received, which is around governments having such large attack surfaces, right?
Yeah.
What do you think are the biggest weaknesses? First to Carlos. Karsten gets a couple of minutes to think about it, or a minute.
What are the biggest weaknesses with the larger organizations and the agencies?
Yes.
The biggest weaknesses, I would say, is the fact that it's so federated. It's so that they're so independently managed and controlled that it's harder to have the influence. And so I get a question from the agencies often saying, where do I begin? I'm waiting for my parent agency to tell me. They told me here's zero trust. They told me to go forth and conquer. And that's pretty much all they gave me. Where do I even begin? And oftentimes I keep telling them, like, look, just begin with the areas you have control over, that you manage. Those are the areas you need to start beginning, because contrary to what some of the other approaches were with improving your security posture, it was always kind of like looking from the outside in and placing controls. This is where you start looking from the inside out. Start looking at where your resources exist. What are the assets that you have that you manage and maintain, and assess whether you have the right controls in place for those. And if the case is that you have weaknesses there, that's where you begin. You start applying those controls. Everything else will fall into place afterwards.
Karsten, would you like to have a go, or shall I read out the next question coming in from the audience?
There's so many different angles how you can look at why it is especially hard for a government to protect their attack surface. I mean, one aspect is the complexity and the heterogeneity of the system. The second aspect is that these systems often are public facing. They're not somewhere on their premises, hidden something. I mean, I completely understand that with a perfectly implemented zero trust structure, you don't need that. It doesn't matter. But you also...
It's not just the heterogeneous aspect, right? It's the fact that it's so federated, meaning it's not something that's not also under the public or under the public sector's control. It's something that could be a private sector industry partner control, that they do work with the government, but they maintain data that's proprietary to the government and public sector. So that's the complexity. And that's why I always say, like, begin with the areas you have control over for now, and then you can mitigate the access and mitigate the spread of any kind of potential breach or compromise that may occur.
Last question I'll be taking. How do you think the balance between on-premise and cloud capabilities is working out? Now, obviously, there's a push in various government entities, for example, in the United States, to go cloud, right? What is a smart way to approach that? Kirsten, I see you're shaking your head. I think I'm aware that you do a lot of on-prem to government as well, right?
Carson, do you want to take this first?
Yeah,
go ahead.
There's a simple view, like the Americans are in the cloud and everyone else is not, but obviously that is not the case, right? So we see also in Europe a lot of shift already to the cloud. We also see that a bit in Asia, less in Middle East, but we also have a lot of US government customers who need and still remain on-prem, or even we have one customer who moved back from cloud to on-prem. I mean, there are these FedRAMP compliant things and stuff like that, but still for very sensitive and very critical use cases, which we more find with governments than with the private sector, still there will remain some smaller situations, also air-gapped systems that remain on-prem. But of course, on broader scale, everything is going to the cloud, and the US is more progress than Europe, is more progress than Asia. That's my simple view.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think that for a while earlier on, there was such a huge drive globally to be in the cloud, right? Because there was a lot of good points and good selling points and benefits from migration to cloud. But especially with the public sector,
it was cheaper.
It was cheaper. Allegedly, it was cheaper. But we're starting to see that it's kind of balancing out, kind of costing the same thing. But the thing is with, especially with the public sector, and at least from my experience, DoD wise, when you think about it from that kind of perspective, there's a portion that you could probably say, okay, this is going to be cloud. We can migrate this portion of our environment to the cloud because it's unclassified in nature, but we just have to make sure we have some controls around it and it's public facing. But there's other aspects such as the critical sensitivity, top secret type of information. They're not gonna. These are entities that are not gonna be like, yeah, let me throw that in Azure. Let me throw that in Google Cloud Platform. Let me throw that into whatever public cloud service provider that's gonna host my services for me. It's interesting because trust is a big play in here, and I know we're talking about zero trust, but there's a level of trust that the government has with letting their data exist in an environment that they don't have control over, and that's pretty much where we're at. It's the reality of things. For me, at least from my perspective, is that we're going to live in a world of hybrid architecture, meaning we're going to have a foot in both doors. We have some portion of our environment is going to be cloud, and some portion of our environment is going to be on-prem. You're looking at manufacturing, utilities, services, and government. They are probably going to be the more prominent verticals and use cases where there's going to be an on-prem need. There's going to be a need for these controls to be deployed on-prem. But they're also going to have a percentage of cloud that needs to be addressed as well. And that's why I always mention invest in a solution that can be interoperable and flexible and adaptable based on your environment and where you're deploying when you need to have coverage on.
So I assume, Carsten, you offer both on-prem and cloud, right?
Of course.
Of course. Okay, great. Thank you. Famous last words. Time is up. Thank you so much, gentlemen. If you, I don't know, one word you would like to nominate or you would like to shout out one sentence to our audience before we wrap up. Anything?
There is and I'll kind of a guilty plug. There is a security and risk event occurring here in the United States at Baltimore between December 9th and the 11th. I will be hosting 2 sessions. One's a workshop for Zero Trust, and the other is a Zero Trust discussion panel where I have representatives from the public and private sector on stage with me, and we're going to be answering some questions about what's the next level of Zero Trust and how do we get to that next level of Zero Trust. Okay. So if you're able to attend, please go.
Okay, guilty plug now also possible for Carsten, based on anything that you would like our audience to know about.
I just want to spread once more and remind everyone, I think we can never win. We can never win, but we can always make sure that the attackers don't win, right? So in order to remain successful and to keep track and not fall behind the attackers, the only way is by sharing information with others, and therefore I can only recommend and encourage everyone, build and foster your personal networks and relationship with other security people in other organizations in other countries and other parts of the world, because that is the only way how we can combine our knowledge and how we can combine our skills, because the attacker, they're doing that. They don't give a shit about laws or regulations or whatever, right?
Excuse me?
So let's do that.
One more thing.
Thank
I
you.
do want to
Okay.
I kind of want to add that. I like this is like that direction. It's the other thing I want to make sure the audience understand is because I get a lot of confusion in terms of, oh, how do I reach that end state of zero trust? And the answer is there's no end state, because the threat landscape continues to evolve. So should your architecture. And zero trust is more of just how do you approach and advancing your architecture, but there's no end state. There's just a sense of maturity and evolution along with what's going on in the threat landscape. And it's continuous. So just make sure that the audience understands that zero trust is a continuous effort.
Cool. Thank you very much, gentlemen. Thank you, Karsten, Carlos. Thank you for your time. Thank you, everybody in the audience. Thanks for all the great questions that you shared with us. If you want to forward this, consume it, listen to it, read a little extract, or just review some of the video recordings, make sure that you check out the VMware website sometimes next week. And if you want to stay up to date, actually, on some of our detections, make sure that you follow our threat intelligence newsletter on LinkedIn. Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you, Alex. Thank you, Carlos. Thank you, audience.